Okay, ooh, that's loud. Somebody has the lapel mic turned up to 100%. That's too much. Okay, all right, that is still too much. There we go. All right, so welcome back. Hello, 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 or welcome for the first time. I know there's a few new people joining the course. So this is, of course, Sociology 376, right? So we are in Sociology of Religion. I haven't tested the Slido to see if it's working. So if someone at some point could post something in there to assuage my doubts, that would be super. All right, so today we are going to keep talking about our definitions of religion, right? So we went through kind of looking at and then critiquing, our three kind of historical categories. Awesome, thank you so much. Our historical categories of religion, right, are functional definition, right, which tended to set. Did you get asked to join someone's church literally on your way to this class? That is the best thing ever. It's like, I would, but I'm on my way to learn about religion, so maybe later. Come talk to me another time. Okay, so yeah, we went through our functional definition, right? Well, that's so funny. I love it. I mean, they know you're vulnerable, you're lonely, you're a student, right? That new religious movement is just queuing in on your insecurities right at this moment. Why do I say assuage like that? Should I say assuage? I don't know. I don't know. That's how I say things. Now I'm self-conscious. Could you assuage my doubts about my own pronunciation? Or assuage them? Whichever one. Okay. Right, so we talked our functional definitions. I'm leaving the happy faces up. They make me smile. Our functional definitions, right, which tended to be too broad, bringing in a bunch of things that aren't necessarily religion, but share some characteristics with religion. Our substantive definitions, right, which tended to be too narrow, often tuned for like Judeo-Christian or kind of Abrahamic religions, but maybe not including other forms of religion that say don't have a deity or don't have like an afterlife or a transcendental realm or whatever it happens to be. And then our social constructionist definitions, which do a good job of explaining things like why religion is so different, say in India compared to in Europe, but struggle a little bit with questions of social change because they view religion as just coming out of pre-existing social circumstances. Okay, I think I did a decent job of kind of summary, right? All right, and so last time, oops, I've gone forward too much. This is where I ended off last time. Okay, I'll bring this desk up just a little bit. There we go. Now I don't feel like a hobbit. Or like I'm in the world of hobbits. There we go. All right, so this is the definition we've been kind of working through, starting in the middle of last class, and we're going to keep working through this as we speak, right? Okay, so we talked about religion, right? And this is Christian Smith's definition of religion from his book, Religion, What It Is, How It Works, and Why It Matters, which for my purposes, I think is the best definition that's out there. Okay, so, right, religion, a complex of culturally prescribed practices, right? So a grouping of practices that a culture tells you need to perform based on premises about the existence and nature of superhuman powers, right? So there's beliefs about the existence of superhuman powers. And just to review, right, in case you weren't here, you can go watch the video because I stream the classes, right? So once you have access to the Canvas, you can go and watch past lectures. Superhuman powers here, Smith is being very deliberate with this term to include both things that are, more powerful than humans that exist within the universe, demons, fairies, whatever it happens to be, and things that are outside the universe, right? God, Allah, Brahman, right? Things like that. So including both of those things, basically because some religions posit superhuman forces that are within the natural order, and other religions posit supernatural force or superhuman forces that are outside the natural order. And we want to make sure that both of those are fit in, whether these forces are personal or impersonal, right? Because different religious systems have different beliefs about, whether these superhuman powers have a mind, have purpose, have will, want things, right? And some of them have that. Others, it's more of an impersonal force, almost like a force of nature, but a supernatural force of nature, if that makes sense. Okay, and that leaves us, obviously, with the last two parts of our definition, right? So this is where we ended last time. Okay, and this part, obviously in red, which seek to help practitioners gain access to or communicate or align with these powers, right? So why is this important, right? So obviously, people's belief in superhuman powers, right, and the purpose of religion, in some ways, is to connect them to whatever superhuman power is posited within that religion, right? You have practices that are geared towards that in whatever way it is, right? And again, these are highly variable. They look very different from religion to religion. 5 times daily prayer in Islam looks a lot different than, forms of meditation in Zen Buddhism, right? They have different purposes because they posit different types of superhuman powers, right? But they're still there ultimately to help you connect with that superhuman power. So why does Smith put this clause in, right? So it's there to include both religions that posit gods, spirits, demons, or that are personal. Oh, sorry, that was going back to the last one. Right. I got that one wrong. I don't know why that's there. Hang on, let me go forward one. Oops, I maybe skipped something. Oh, here it is, right? So the reason, this whole thing goes together, right? Helping, and I just messed up my slide, which I'll go fix after class. Okay, so we want to gain access to these powers. That's why people practice religion, at least in part, right? Whatever it happens to be, whether it be inner peace or, healing, or, to help them smite your enemies, right? Whatever it is, we do things religiously because we're seeking access to these powers, right? And why do we tend to do that, right? So people turn to these superhuman powers because there are conditions that we can't control, right? We get sick and we die. Our enemies surround us. We are in impossible circumstances, whatever it happens to be. And so people turn to superhuman powers, because they can't solve those problems, right? And typically what Smith will say is if a person can solve a problem, they aren't going to turn to superhuman powers, right? So let's say in a country where you have a very built up and defined medical system that can obviously cure a lot of diseases, you're not going to turn to faith healers in order to, cure cancer, right? You're going to go to an oncologist. But let's say you were living somewhere, I don't know, let's say Bolivia I don't know if this is even true of Bolivia, but let's say Bolivia, right, where the medical system is a little bit less developed, or Guatemala. I know it's true of Guatemala. Guatemala, where the medical system is way less developed, right, if you're sick, you might very well turn to a faith healer, and lots of people do, because there's no way that you're going to solve that problem on your own, right? Or if you're in some kind of financial ruin you can't find your way out of, right? You've got relationship problems, whatever it happens to be, right? If you can't solve those problems on your own, people will turn to superhuman powers to do so, right? We talk about secularization later in the class. One of the big arguments that people make for why they think secularization is going on is that there's far fewer categories of life today where we need the intervention of superhuman powers, right? We have so much more capacity in the modern world that we may not need this, so religion should naturally fade. That's the prediction that people make. We'll see if we think that's true a little bit later. Okay, so yeah, I mean, people seek sometimes superhuman assistance as a redundancy or backup plan for conditions that they can't fully control, right? Like you might want to keep God in your back pocket just in case, right? It's funny, I just have on my bookshelf a book called Back Pocket God. So, I don't know. I don't think that's the exact thing because there's a picture of a smartphone on it, but whatever. it also comes out of the National Study of Youth and Religion, so it should be interesting. I just haven't quite got to it yet. But yeah, sometimes people keep faith there just in case, right? As a like, just in case, right? Maybe, in case I need some kind of superhuman assistance in the future, I'll keep going with these religious rituals, right? If I do get sick and it can't be cured, right? If I have relationship problems that I can't otherwise work out, if I need some kind of emotional consolation that I can't figure out for myself, I'll keep religion as a kind of backup plan, right? There is a lot of that. Okay, so what Smith will say, these aren't the only things religion do, but it's the core of why people turn to religion, right? And so when we get to talking about, and we'll do that very shortly, what religion does a lot of things. But what Smith will say, okay, and I want to cover the last part of this definition. This is the core of what religion is, right? So this is the primary purpose of religion, is what's encompassed in this definition. A lot of the other things that we tend to associate with religion, right? So things like community, things like, well, we'll talk about them, right? Other aspects of religion, community is the one that sticks in my mind right now. Those he thinks of as secondary features of religion and features that are shared with a lot of other things, like giving meaning, right? So, things like community and giving your life meaning, right? These are things that, yes, religion often does, but he doesn't think that's the primary purpose of religion, right? The primary purpose is connecting us with those superhuman powers, because that's really the core of what religion is. And this last little bit in red, right? In hopes of realizing human goods and avoiding things bad, right? We obviously want the superhuman powers to bring about good things for us, right? I suppose you could wish ill things upon your enemy by appealing to a superhuman power, but that would still be a good thing for you, right? Crush my enemies, that's still good for you at the end of the day, even if it's bad for them, or because you want to avoid bad things. You don't want to get sick, you don't want to get divorced, you don't want to lose your house, right? All of these things are potentially things that religion also does. This is kind of the focus, right? We turn to religion to get good things and avoid bad things. And that's at the core of Smith's definition. So, that whole, if you kind of take a look at it, right, that whole definition, if you take it from beginning to end, all of these components really make up a really tight definition, and each part of this definition is doing something different and something really important. So, that is Smith's definition of religion, and that's the definition we're kind of going to go with for the rest of the course. Okay, so in the book, Smith cites Martin Reisebrot, I want to say. I can't remember how to pronounce that. Who identifies 3 types of religious practices. We're going to talk about each of these in turn, right? So the first one is interventionist practices, the second behavior regulating practices, and the third one is discursive practices. Okay, so interventionist practices. Basically, these are for establishing contact with that superhuman order, right? To control or manipulate it, right? So things like, what Smith talks about in the book, wearing amulets, performing magic spells, or incantations. Those would be, interventionist practices, right? So even, I don't know, wearing amulets sounds like an odd thing, right? But I have a lot of Catholic friends who wear things like scapulars or St. Benedict medals. And the St. Benedict medal specifically is supposed to ward off demonic influence, right? Because it has a very specific prayer against demonic influence written on it in Latin. So this might be, establish contact with superhuman powers to control or manipulate them. In that case, right, kind of link yourself to God in order, or St. Benedict, to ward off demonic influence, right? Okay. Sometimes interventionist practices might be temporary interactions or even fusion with superhuman powers, for example, in a trance or ascetic kind of state. So, right, you can see this with some forms of meditation, or sometimes, people will even use psychedelics for this kind of purpose, right? To actually interact with or even fuse with the supernatural, right? To enter a dissociative state like a trance, or some other state where your consciousness is expanded, into the wider world. Okay, and sometimes, it's to activate the superhuman potential that slumbers within a person, like reaching a state of enlightenment, right? And this is the goal of, say, a lot of Buddhist practices, is to reach states of enlightenment, typically done, right, through symbolic actions like prayer, chants, gestures, formulas, sacrifices, vows, or divination, right? So you're trying to connect with a superhuman power to kind of activate some kind of superhuman potential. Now, not every system has any of these, right? They are widely variable. Okay, so sorry, this is my very silly example of this, right? So this is from an anime called The Slayers, where one of the characters, Lena Inverse, calls upon the power of a demon to basically cast a super powerful spell. And this would be, obviously this is silly because it's anime and it's fantasy, but this is the kind of thing that you might see, right?
Darkness beyond twilight, crimson beyond blood.
If I had sound,
buried in the stream of
which I
time
don't.
where your power grows.
Hang on. This always happens when I change rooms. Okay, where is my, oh, it should be there. No. Oh, I hate it when this happens.
I pledge my, let the fool.
So odd. All right, well, I have other clips. I hope they work. Will this one work?
So we are at McDonald's, and we're going to find out what
clip. Oh, Frickle Pickle. I know what's going on. This panel has too many buttons. So I can put the monitors on, and it'll show this. But if I don't also put audio on the right input, then it doesn't happen. Okay. See, here we go.
Darkness beyond twilight, crimson beyond blood that flows. Buried in the stream of time is where your power grows.
She's calling on demonic power.
To stand before the mighty bestowed in my unworthy. Look, there she is! Let the fools who stand before me be destroyed by the power you and I possess. Dragon Slave!
Man, showing one anime clip and someone walked out. I know it's not for everyone, but geez, like 30 seconds. No, I'm kidding. Could have been an emergency. Who knows? Or maybe you're really boring. Huh. Never thought of that. Okay. They joined the class and they're like, screw this. This is terrible. All right. Enough joking. So, Reisenbrot cites German names, man. Reisenbrot. So my former boss, and she's still a friend, her name is Sandra Bucerius, that's how we say it here, and she's tried to teach us how to pronounce it the proper German way, and it's like, I'm like, huh? Just doesn't work. So German names are hard. Reisenbrot. All right, cites basically a couple of subcategories of interventionist practices that he suggests are general practices that all members of religious communities can or should participate in, right? So sometimes there are these practices, right? They're interventionist. They're meant for, accessing superhuman powers in some ways, gaining some kind of intervention. And generally, these are the types of practices that religions will say basically all or most people in the religion can and should participate in. So some of them are going to be very specialized, right? If you think of something like, this, like trance or ascetic states, right? This is typically reserved for specialists, right? For people who have a lot of time to put into, you're going to spend years meditating so that you can reach nirvana, right? So that you can detach yourself from all worldly encumbrances, but you kind of have to be a specialist for a lot of these things, right? Or reaching a state of enlightenment, right? That's not easy, right? That's going to be for your religious specialists, probably, some kind of cleric, priest, monk, someone who's going to spend a lot of time doing these things. These subcategories tend to be things that are practiced by most people within a religious kind of subgroup. So they would be like calendrical practices, right? Observed in religious calendars to mark times. And these tend to have sort of three themes, right? So there are some that are things like, bless you, vegetative, right? Things like harvest festivals, right? Things that are supposed to bring the rains in certain religious cultures, right? Things that have to do with plant growth, especially because so much of kind of human history and human experience has been tied up with food, right? Because we needed to grow it, and food has generally been scarce. It's not for us, but it has historically been pretty scarce and hard to get. So there's a lot of things that have to do with like thanking deities, praying for deities and doing festivals and sacrifices and things to make sure that, you get your food growth, you get your rains and all of those things, and, avoid hailstorms and all that stuff that would disrupt, seasonal food growth. Okay, so astrological cosmic, right? That's our other kind of category in here, right? For kind of like life cycle kind of calendrical events. So things that are astrological, cosmic, special dates, right, that come along. Here you could think of things like that mark a specific moment in history, right? That mark something important that happened. Something like Passover in Judaism might very well be here, or like, Rosh Hashanah. Things that mark specific kind of moments and are representative of certain things happening within the life of the community and at a cosmological level. So that would be your other category. And then salvation historical, right? So marking important moments in history that brought certain kind of, how to put this, that mark off an important event in the relationship with that superhuman power that has led, and usually historically located, that has led to some kind of change in human existence, right? So probably we just went through one of these, so it's easy to remember, right? Christmas is one of these, right, for Christians. So Christmas, why is that important? Well, that is Jesus being born, right? So that is the Messiah in Christianity, right? The Son of God coming to earth, being born, and basically the beginning of the end of sort of what's important for human salvation. And then the other one that we're coming to, right, in the, probably, I can't remember what the date of Easter is, but it'll be either during the semester or right after it. Easter, right, marking the death and resurrection of Jesus. And for Christians, right, this has this salvific sort of meaning, right? That is when sin and death has been definitively dealt with. From there on, everybody who wants it can get salvation. So these would be your kind of salvation historical events that are marked, and people who are Christian are supposed to mark these every single year because they are important, right? Okay. I think there was a question, and works on the stream. I don't know what that means. Okay. Oh, I see. The sound worked on the stream because I didn't push that button. Now I push the button, it works everywhere, and everything is wonderful. Okay, would the second point include exorcists? Oh, the second point, I think you're meaning temporary interactions or even fusions with superhuman power. Is that what we meant? I think so. Yes, okay. Exorcisms. Okay, that's an interesting one for that second one. Temporary interactions or even fusion with superhuman power. For example, in a trance or ascetic state. Now see, I've never seen a real life exorcism. I've only seen it in the movies. So now you're going on, William Peter Blatty's account, which I don't know if that's a good one. I don't know that it would be like a fusion with a superhuman power because you're trying to cast out a superhuman power. You're more, I guess for this first point, trying to establish, when you're like, the power of Christ compels you. Watch The Exorcist. It is he who casts you out. I just remember this. Because I'm weird, and I teach a class on Catholicism and pop culture where we talk about The Exorcist. So I've gone and read the entire Catholic rite of exorcism, and it's wild. It's fun. Should we pull it up and just read it? No, that's probably bad. But yeah, I think it would, exorcism would more fit kind of this first one where you're doing specific incantations to, affect a superhuman power, control or manipulate it, kind of cast out a demon. I think that makes more sense if I'm thinking about it here. Okay. Oh, I'm still on this slide. Life cycle practices, right? So in every life, right, you have these specific moments, right? Things that happen kind of regularly because they happen to most people. And basically, you perform certain ceremonies on certain occasions, basically to mark these things in a religious way. So things like, birth, entry into religious community, affirmation of the latter by young adults, marriage, death, and dying, right? Okay, so there's obvious examples of these. I'm going to pull these from Christianity, right, and especially from Roman Catholicism, because I know it the best. If we think of this, right, at birth, you're going to get, typically shortly after birth, in Catholicism, you're going to baptize that baby, right? So that baby will get baptized, and that's sort of their entry into life and entry into the Christian community, right? Other things, right, and these can kind of go together in Christianity, right? You would have things like, confirmation. In Catholicism, right, a ceremony where the young person is supposed to take account of their own faith, right? Stop, relying on their parents to guide their faith, and they are supposed to become the guides of their own faith as they enter sort of adolescence. It usually happens around 12. You see this in Judaism as well, with something like bar mitzvah, right, where there's, young Jews are supposed to learn sort of specific prayers that they can recite in Hebrew, and then recite those as their sort of mark of entering into adult Jewish life, right? So you see this in almost every kind of religion is going to have some kind of rite of passage from childhood into adulthood where you're supposed to take control of your own faith. And then marriage, right, in those cultures where marriage is actually a religious ceremony. Now that's not all of them, right? In some kind of religious systems, it's like more of a contract, one that is divinely sanctioned, but not a religious ritual in and of itself. But say particularly if I think of like Roman Catholicism, marriage is a sacrament in Roman Catholicism, so it is a religious ritual, right? And to really be married, you can only really be married in the Catholic Church from a Catholic perspective, right? Any other marriage, like a civil marriage, is not marriage from a Catholic point of view because you didn't do the marriage stuff. And then death and dying, right? We know this, and this is funerals. And we all have, all cultures have some kind of funerary rituals that they go through, right? To mark that end of life and transition either into rebirth or oblivion or the afterlife or whatever it is, right? And they're fascinating, right? My uncle died over the summer. He was very old, don't worry about it. But I went to his funeral, right? And it was super interesting. This is where sociologists are the worst humans in the world. I'm listening to the funeral and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Look at what the emphasis they're putting on, it's a Catholic funeral. How many times, they mention, your servant Richard who's gone to sleep but will rise again, right? I'm like, oh, cool. Like, that's super interesting. I see all the ritualistic stuff and the reaffirmation of the beliefs of the community stuff in there. And I'm like, cool. This is a very useful example for my class. I'm so sorry my uncle died. But it's actually super great, right? No, like I said, he's very old and he had dementia. So, he's in a better place. Or not, depending on your beliefs. Who knows? Maybe not. Maybe he just doesn't exist anymore. Who knows? Or he's been reborn as a turtle. I don't know. It could be any of these things. So, and then other variable practices, number 3, right? So life cycle, we all kind of get. And variable practices that react to unforeseen circumstances or catastrophic events, right? If something terrible happens, right, special prayers, special ceremonies that you do, if a really bad thing has happened, right? If there's a natural disaster, religions will have ways of dealing with those things sometimes. Now, not all of these are found in every religion, right? I struggle to think of a specific ritual, say in Roman Catholicism, that would fit this category. But maybe in certainly in Mesoamerican religions or in kind of classical Greek religion, right? If terrible events happen, you would go and sacrifice more to the gods, right? To try and vitiate their rage, right? Or whatever it is, quell their anger. Because you're like, oh, there was an earthquake or a plague. We better sacrifice more to the gods because they're obviously angry with us. Christianity, doesn't have as much of this, but definitely different religions are going to have kind of different practices around catastrophic events. Not all of them are going to be there, right? Because certainly, different religions have different conceptions of natural and supernatural order. So, you might not have, a religious harvest festival in a religion because it thinks, that the gods can't be swayed on these particular things. Okay, so when it comes to our interventionist practices, right, some of them can be performed by everyone, right? Lay people. So this is a very typical way, if we're going to talk about, non-clerics or not religious specialists, typically, we refer to this in religious terms as lay people or the laity, right? And laity is Laity. And this is a very Christian term. It comes out of Latin, but we'll talk about it this way as we go through. Right now, so there are some things that anyone can do, right? Like anyone can pray. Anyone can do a bunch of religious rituals. Weirdly, in Catholicism, anyone can baptize someone as long as they use the right formula and the circumstances are correct, right? So there are going to be a bunch of practices that anyone can do. Anyone can meditate. Anyone can pray the rosary. Anyone can, sit Shiva, right? There's all sorts of things like this. So ordinary religious people can do this. Others have to be taken on by advanced religious practitioners. Sorry, there's this one comedian. Her name is Jen Fulwiler, and she was an atheist who then converted to Catholicism, and I find her really, really funny. And she has this bit where, if you find that someone has been possessed by a demon, you're probably calling a Catholic priest. You're not going to call, Jim, the non-denominational worship pastor from the River Church, right? Because, we want a certain level of advanced religious practitioner to deal with demons, right? So if you think demons are real. Right, so some things have to be done by advanced religious practitioners, right? And there's often, a ceremony that's been gone through by these advanced religious practitioners in order to reach that level, right? So this I'm going to say is a very key point. Most people are happy to do basic religious observances. For even the average religious person, right? Most of them, most of the time, are going to do the absolute bare minimum, right? Why? Well, because realistically, they're not that religious, right? Even if they go to church or go to synagogue, or to the mosque, temple regularly, right? That's just regular religious observance. They're going to do the minimum at most times, right? And most, it's probably something like 90% of even people who consider themselves religious are in this category, right? They're going to do your basic religious observances because it's important to them, but not, everything. A very small percentage, right, of advanced religious practitioners will seek salvation or another religious good at whatever cost, right? So, for most, let's go back into the history of Christianity a little bit. Most people, it was okay, they were going to do, going to church, they were going to, get their sacraments, right? Follow the kind of life cycle of what the church says you're supposed to do, and that was good enough. But some of them, that wasn't good enough, right? And they were like, I'm going to move out to the desert and live in a cave. This actually happened, right? Early in Christianity, desert monks, particularly in like Egypt and other places like kind of bordering the Sahara Desert, these monks would move out to the, or in the Holy Land, right? They would move out to the desert, live in caves, and spend all of their time in prayer. Because they're like, I just feel super duper strongly about this, and I just need to commit all of my life to this. And that is your upper tier of religious practitioner, right? They're going to spend their whole lives and dedicate everything to it, right? So, some of them, some advanced religious practitioners, might also be recognized or be official religious leaders, right? Clergy, seers, right? Oracles, shaman, or mystics or some type of ascetic. Some of them won't be, right? Some of them are never kind of actually recognized. They just go off and live in the desert and spend their lives, kind of imitating John the Baptist, living off wild honey and locusts, and they think that's a really, really good idea. It doesn't sound like a great diet to me, but whatever. I'm partial to fast food, so there you go. Although maybe locusts and wild honey is better for you, who knows. An example of this would be someone like St. Francis of Assisi, right? The medieval kind of Catholic ascetic who basically, gave up all of his possessions, very famously, in, a bit of a drama queen in some ways. I probably shouldn't say that, but it's kind of true. So he decided he wanted to commit his life to God after seeing a vision at a broken down church somewhere in Italy as he's on his way to become a crusader. And then his dad didn't really like this. So his dad basically brought him to court. And he's like, well, look, he's wearing all of my clothes and he's spending my wealth on this crazy religious project of his and I want him stopped. And St. Francis of Assisi is like, great. And he strips naked in the courtroom and walks out of the courtroom completely buck naked. Like, you can have all your clothes. I don't give a crap. I'm committing my life to God, right? This is your classic advanced religious practitioner, right? And he founds a religious order and all of this stuff. Apparently he could talk to birds. St. Francis of Assisi, interesting character. You'd probably think of him today as mentally ill in some way, but, Catholic saint. So there you go. Okay. Jesus was born so you could get presents, and Jesus died so you could get chocolate. I know what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Are exorcisms still done or common in some places? So, okay, now we're getting into interesting questions. So officially, by Catholic rules, every diocese has to have an exorcist. So somewhere in Edmonton, I don't know where, I could probably ask. I'm sure I know someone who knows this. There is some priest in Edmonton who is officially the diocesan exorcist. I don't know who it is. I should ask. How commonly are they done? Well, it depends who you talk to. If you go on YouTube, you can absolutely find priests who say that they've done exorcisms, and it's a little odd to listen to them, but they are, by all accounts or all appearances, perfectly serious about this. So I don't know how common it is. I presume not terribly common. I think the last recorded exorcism in the United States happened in the 1940s. So it's a way back, that's the last official exorcism that's sort of on the books, also the basis for the book and the movie The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. But I don't know how commonly it is done, really. But certainly, I know in some Pentecostal Christian things, or Pentecostal Christian churches, especially those that are kind of more linked with Africa, they're quite common, right? It happens and I've been to one, it was crazy. Or it's they have a demon and they cast the demon out right there. And there was a lot of writhing and screaming and singing. So, it was fun. I didn't know what was going on. I was so confused. My friend who was there with me had to explain it to me afterwards. And I was like, oh, cool. I will use this. This was when I was 20. So I didn't know I would teach this class at the time. Okay. Okay, so astrological, cosmic. My last slide, I have notes on this one. Could I bring the logo? Okay, I missed 3 slides following it from where you started today. The last slide I have notes on is superhuman. I think. Oh, you might have lost the stream. I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. Okay, I'm gonna just ignore that comment because I don't know what to do about it. I'm sorry. You can come talk to me. Could I bring the local extras? I have to figure out who it is. I actually think that would be fascinating. To shadow. These are interesting questions. I can ask. I actually do know who I can ask about these things. I wonder if my friend Anton is on Messenger right now. He would probably know. He's a priest in the Netherlands. I could ask him. He's usually very kind about humoring these kinds of crazy questions. My dad and my friend have both says multiple times, not officially, but Well, I don't think it's working if it's been multiple times. So maybe you gotta like take it up to the Catholic level, right? It's like clearly you've got the wrong religious practitioner. Okay. I love the funny comments. I know in voodoo religion, possession is still really common. Yeah. So yeah, in Haiti, for sure, like where you still see voodoo pretty commonly practiced. Yeah, there's a belief in spirits. And I will say, like, I'm going to shoot off on the side for 1 second. I'll probably talk about this later. In the West, right, we don't really largely believe that spirits roam the earth and can come into our bodies and affect us. Charles Taylor, who's a philosopher, Catholic philosopher, calls us the buffered selves, right? Where we believe that yourself exists in like this bubble with like a shield around you, and you are in here by yourself. Historically, very, very unusual belief, because if you go to lots of other places, right, historically or even now, right, lots of places, say in the Caribbean or Africa or parts of Asia, there's a belief that there are spirits all over the place, and they are coming in, into your body, into your brain, and messing around with stuff all the time. So it seems like a really weird belief to us, like it's spirits that can affect things. But from a historical perspective, we are the weird ones, right? In thinking that we are kind of isolated from spiritual forces. And it's just because, 4 centuries of kind of humanistic or kind of naturalistic philosophy in the West has changed the way we view the universe. And I'm not saying one of these is right or wrong. I'm just saying, like, in historical terms, we're the weird ones, right? And yeah, we definitely see those beliefs still in lots of places in the world. Okay. Are lay people, ordinary, religious people used synonymously? No, yeah, so ordinary, laity is the technical term. I'm going to say ordinary means the same thing here. Okay, I'll go back to my astrological cosmic. Okay, where was that? I'm going to erase stuff here because there's nowhere to write. All right, so astrological cosmic, right, would mark, like, if there were particular kind of events that need to be marked, like, I'm trying to think of a particular example that have some sort of cosmic import, right? Something like marking the beginning of time, right? Or a cycle of time. A lot of religions have a notion of like time as a circular kind of thing. And so if you're moving back towards like the beginning of a cycle of history or into a period of kind of, a time of war, a time of chaos, right? Something that sort of has astrological or cosmic import. And if, say, you have like an apocalyptic religion, particularly new religious movements are like this, right? A lot of them are apocalyptic. If you think that you're entering the end times and need to mark that with a specific ritual or do something to stop the end times from coming, that would be an example. I mean, new religious movements. I can't remember which cult it was, or new religious movement rather. They thought that the arrival of this comet was this cosmic moment where, basically one cycle was ending, and if they all offed themselves, their spirits would jump. Yeah, what? It's the Heaven's Gate cult. That's Heaven's Gate, yes. you're right, Heaven's Gate. Then their souls would fly up to this comet, and they would be taken to Comet Land. I don't remember what the exact belief was. I'm assuming it was heaven or some kind of transcendent realm, right? That's a kind of astrological cosmic event, right? Because in this case, it's marked by the arrival of a specific cosmological event. I guess like a lot of, if there's something that's has to do with the stars or calendrical events, like, I'm trying to think, Cancer is rising or something, right? It's not just for, questions about the people you're dating. This star is in the 4th house, and what does that say about our relationship? In religions, a particular star constellation coming back in might mark a certain cosmological event that then needs to be kind of dealt with. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I'm going to hope that makes sense. And you can ask again if it doesn't make sense. Where do Jehovah's Witnesses fall here, since they don't typically celebrate birthdays or holidays? Yeah, that's an interesting question. They're Jehovah's Witnesses sorry. I have now Lutheran satire bubbling around in my head. I should show you the Jehovah's Witness thing from Lutheran satire. It's hilarious. Jemima's wildebeests is what they call them. Jehovah's Witnesses, right, are a little bit odd. They have obviously their own ceremonies, but yeah, they don't celebrate birthdays. They don't celebrate Christmas and all of those things. With the raptor? Do you mean the rapture? I'm thinking like Jurassic Park. I'm like, is the dinosaur from Jurassic Park an astrological cosmic thing? Yeah, okay, maybe. But the rapture, very particularly, would probably... the problem is there's not a lot of agreement on what the rapture is or if it even exists, right? It's a very kind of fringe belief that only appears in like the 19th century. I think was premillennial kind of apocalyptic belief that you find especially in Pentecostalism. But yeah, would it be a cosmological event, where all the real Christians get, hoovered up into heaven, leaving behind only those bad people? The Simpsons had a great clip of this where it's like, one of the babies gets raptured, but the other one didn't, so now you know what the evil twin was. Right? I think, that would probably be more on the salvation historical kind of side, maybe. But that one, yeah, it's a weird belief. I think you could probably class it in either. Maybe astrological cosmic. You're asking really hard questions now, and you're making me think. Maybe astrological cosmic would be the right category here, because it marks the beginning of the end times, the 1,000. Because I think in that particular belief, the rapture happens, then you get 1,000 years where the devil rules the earth, and then 1,000-year reign of Jesus or something. I can't remember exactly. It's been a while since I read the crappy novels based on this belief, the Left Behind novels. So I'm losing a little bit. I'm clearly not a premillenarianist, so I don't remember exactly what's in it. But yeah, I think astrological cosmic would be there. And then, of course, the dinosaurs come and tear you apart. No, I'm sorry. I'm mocking your spelling error. I'm a bad person. You can write it on my Rate My Professor. Bad person, mock spelling. Okay. Like, I don't make spelling mistakes. I do all the time. Okay, so behavior regulating practices, right? This is our next big category. And these ones are really easy to understand, right? These are the types of practices where religion shapes everyday life, but with reference to superhuman powers, right? And this can allow or disallow certain behaviors, but there has to be some reference here to the will of a superhuman power. So the most common one that you're going to think here when you think of behavior regulating practices are dietary practices, right? Because a lot of religions will have dietary restrictions, what you can eat, what you can't eat, based on the will of the deity, right? So Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism, and then Buddhism in certain forms, have these sort of, regulations on what you can and can't eat. All right, now I've got this clip. It's kind of funny, from more or less secular Jews trying to keep kosher.
So we are at McDonald's, and we're going to find out what kosher options we have on site.
It's 2 pages long.
Only animals with split hooves who chew their cud can be kosher.
The pigs don't qualify because they have split hooves but do not chew the cud. Very interesting.
Animal must not feel any pain. Animal rights activists.
Fish must have fins and scales. What fish don't have fins and scales?
Shellfish, eel, shrimp, and crab. I love all of those things.
Meat and dairy products should be consumed separately with a 6-hour waiting period in between.
I totally forgot that I had put milk in my coffee this morning.
Hi there, do you have a kosher menu?
I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna have to settle for a milkshake.
Utensils that touch meat cannot also touch dairy unless properly cleaned per kosher cleaning standards.
Find a clean pot that has not been used for 24 hours. This doesn't look like it's been used.
Drop utensils in the pot of boiling water one at a time. Kosher wine can only be handled by Jewish people.
This wine is not kosher.
One exception is that if the wine is heated to almost boiling, it can then be handled by non-Jewish people. Why?
Man, Jews love to boil
This is intense.
I foresee myself breaking this.
I'm ready to do this and go back to my roots.
So I have now officially stocked up for my week of keeping kosher with these 12 bottles of kosher red wine.
I had bought all this food before we started this video, but I can't eat any of it.
I didn't know what I was going to be able to eat for breakfast, but it turns out these waffles are... Oh no! I literally just dropped all the waffles, but these toaster waffles are kosher.
Welcome to Starbucks. Popping out today.
Hi there, do you all have a kosher menu by chance?
Do you think this food today is kosher?
I don't know. It's like meat.
I don't know what kosher is.
No, unfortunately, no.
Do you have kosher options? Like, is it...
No kosher options.
What are we looking for, Jen?
Kosher alcohol?
Everyone wants to take a round of Jello shots, but Jello isn't kosher.
I don't know if what I'm drinking is kosher. It's tequila.
Kicks are kosher. Kicks are kosher!
Here's where I'm struggling. Almond milk creamer does not have an OU sign.
I woke up really hungover this morning and I was really craving a pulled pork sandwich and I completely forgot about the whole kosher thing, so here I am.
We're about to eat the kosher chicken that Josh prepared.
So I just got back from a camping trip. There wasn't really anything kosher.
Ice cream is hard to find kosher, so we actually got Dole Whip.
Little holiday holla.
I'm like the worst Jew in the world. I just got a tattoo. My Jewish ancestors are rolling in their graves. I think if I learned anything this week, it was that I do not deny myself of like anything that I want.
And I would just walk around the kitchen going, no, can't eat that, can't eat that.
By the end of it, it was pretty simple. Like, it wasn't, like, you could go to a restaurant and even if they didn't know whether or not the meal was kosher, you could kind of tell.
At restaurants and stuff, I guess I would try to just eat whatever seemed the most kosher instead of asking.
I think it would have been easier if I had like a community of people around me.
I went to a Shabbat dinner, which a lot of my friends do, and I don't always go, but I thought it would be a perfect opportunity, A, to hang out with friends, and B, to keep very easy kosher.
All props to people who do this.
I couldn't do it, and you do it every day.
Okay, so. Oh, BuzzFeed. I probably should have. Feels like it would take a long time to do the dishes, putting in one implement at a time into a pot of boiling water. Right, so a lot of the things that we think of here, right, behavior regulating practices, a lot of them have to do with things like food. There are certainly other ones, right, but those are the ones I think we're most familiar with, right? So certain things that are and aren't allowed, and it could be, other things like, there are very specific rules as to, there's some debate about this, in Islam, like, a Muslim man can marry a Christian or Jewish woman, but a Muslim woman can't marry a Christian or Jewish man, right? So there are these, certain practices that are forbidden. And again, there are different schools in Islam. They don't all have that belief, but that's certainly in some of them. Okay, I think Sunni Islam specifically. Okay, and there has to be a reference to the will of a superhuman power in there, right? So why can't Jews eat pork? Well, because it's laid out for them in the Torah, right, in the books of the Old Testament, that these things are forbidden for, the people of Israel by God. Okay. Oh yeah, that's a really interesting point. This seems like most of these dietary practices also almost require community to maintain them. And this is why if you look at, say, where, like if you look at the United States and you look at where Orthodox Jews, right, those that are highly observant tend to live, it's in a relatively small number of places, right? They tend to cluster in big cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Miami all have really large Orthodox Jewish communities, and largely they will set up in kind of particular areas of these places, and they set up restaurants, shops, and other services like, obviously synagogues that all service this community, because otherwise it's really, really hard for Jewish people to keep kosher. And like that video doesn't even go all the way to the really strict kosher laws. There are laws as to like even whether Gentiles, like non-Jews, can handle the food or even be in the same room. My mom, very briefly, when she was starting out as a teacher, and she's been retired forever now, but one of the first jobs she had was at the Jewish school, Talmud Torah. She taught Daryl Cates. Weird. Apparently, he was not very nice. There was a lot of, my dad has a lot of money, so I don't have to listen to you. Weird. So apparently he's not a very nice, he wasn't a very nice kid. I don't know, maybe he's a great guy now. But as a Gentile, right, she's Catholic, she had to eat her lunch in a different room. She couldn't even be in the lunchroom with the Jewish teachers. She had to, because she had non-kosher food, and it was like, yeah, that can't be there, because if you like walk it across the room, then the whole room is non-kosher, or something. I don't remember what the rules were, but she was like, it was the weirdest thing. We were like eating, the 3 Gentile teachers at the school, and she taught French, had to eat in like the storage closet, right? That was like, yes, this is the room for the Gentile teachers. You go eat your lunch in here, right? But that was to maintain those kosher rules, and there are a ton of them, right? So that is fun. Okay. These events that are observed according to phases of the moon, examples of astrological cosmic. Yeah, I think those would also fit, like, yeah, cycles of the stars or phases of the moon, right? Usually like lunar calendrical events, as long as they're not something like that has to do with vegetative growth, would fit that for sure. Okay. All right, where are we? Am I out of slides? Did I skip one? Hang on. I think I skipped one. Did I skip one? I did. Oh, I skipped one. I'm sorry. I'm back. Okay, discursive practices. Oh, thank God. This one's important, right? Okay, so discursive practices are interpersonal communications about the nature, status, or accessibility of superhuman powers, their manipulability and their will, as well as techniques of self-empowerment, right? So, this is any time that people specifically talk about religion and religious things, right? Then you've entered into the world of discursive practices. So, if you end up, if you go to Sunday school or some kind of equivalent thing as a kid, you're in a discursive practices, right? Where people are teaching you about the religion that you're in, the meaning of the ceremonies, all of those things, right? When you're getting ready as a Catholic to do things like First Communion or confirmation, there are classes, right? You sit through these classes, usually in the church basement, and someone tells you about the meaning of all of these things, its significance, and all of that stuff. But any kind of religious teaching, right, that tells you the meaning of these things, especially if they explain to you, what the ceremonies are, how to do the prayers, what the proper postures are, all of these things fall under the rubric of discursive practices, right? So if you were to go off and, today decide that, just because you wanted to join the Roman Catholic Church, right, and you go down to your local parish, you would be enlisted in a class called RCIA, or the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, and it's a bunch of classes, right? You get a sponsor, you do a bunch of classes where they explain to you what the Catholic faith is, and then you have to wait around till Easter to get baptized and confirmed and all of that jazz. But this is your classic discursive practice, right? And essentially all religions have some version of this, either formal or super informal, where things are taught, right? So things like religious teaching, in Christianity, catechesis, or the teaching of the rules of the faith, or even just, people doing theology, is all a function of these kind of discursive practices. Okay. Yep. Okay, so yes, a religion class at school definitely counts as a discursive practice, right? So if you went to Catholic school, or if you're at the Edmonton Muslim Academy, or whatever it has to be, or whatever it is, right? And they're talking to you about your religion, those are discursive practices, right? They might not be within the formal setting of like a church or a mosque, but they're still discursive practices for sure. All right, we've got 19 minutes left. Okay, I still don't know what to do about that comment. I'm sad about it. All right, I'm going to shift over because I have my next slideshow ready to go here, I hope. How religion works. And I think I just have to very quickly switch the slide out to the one I'm using so we don't lose our comments. Okay, switch Slido. And that number should change. And I don't know if these will actually, it works, huzzah. Okay. We'll see if it actually works. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so we're going to talk here about how religion works, right? We're going to keep going with this on Thursday. This is from that next part of Smith's book, where he lines up how religion works. And I honestly don't pay too much attention to the comic. I just put like funny images, how religion works, and this is what came up. So I thought it was appropriate for the cover page. Okay, so like I said a few minutes ago, there's a lot of other stuff that religion does, right? We think about, a bunch of other things, meaning in life, community, all of that stuff, identity that religion fosters, trances, ecstatic states, all sorts of things like that are also things that we commonly find in religions, right? Now, what Smith says, right, and he admits that arguably religion is more than simply the culturally prescribed practices and premises about superhuman agents, right? Because when you actually go to religions, right, you find a lot of other things. And these are traits that are shared not by all religions, but very commonly in religions, right? Which is why, when we look at our three categories of religious belief, or of definitions of religion, right, our substantive, our functional, and our social constructionist, a lot of people get hung up with trying to fit all of these aspects that we commonly find in religions into that definition. And Smith, I think, very adeptly and very correctly doesn't exclude those, but he suggests that these are secondary aspects of religion. Now, I think you kind of have to do that, right? Because otherwise, the temptation is to broaden out the definition, right? I think you tend to, if you want to, be like, and, you take Smith's definition and you're like, and it fosters communities, and, creates, identities that are long-lasting and motivate people to do things, right? The second you start to branch out into some of those aspects of religion, ultimately, your definition starts to kind of get big, right? And you start to soak up things that are like religion or share some common topographical kind of features of religion, but probably aren't, properly speaking, religions. Okay. So, according to Smith, right, the essence of religion, I'm going to highlight this in a very aggressive green. Oh, that's not a highlighter at all, you fool. I chose the color, I didn't choose the highlighter. All right, very aggressive green. According to Smith, the essence of religion is the practices that are meant to access superhuman powers for things like blessing and help. Those other things that we tend to think of as religion are byproducts and supports of the practices. So, and I think this makes a ton of sense, right? So community, right? there's lots of communities that aren't religious, right? You can find, community at your local gym, right? You can start working out and you get to know all of the gym bros there and you all support each other, right? And you're very, you go out afterwards for protein, because I don't know, gym bros, right? It's like what has like just protein powder, straight shots of protein powder, right? You can find community in a gym. That doesn't make your gym a religion, despite how people sometimes treat it. Thank you for that. Ecstatic experiences, right? Like you could pop a bunch of mushrooms and have an ecstatic experience right now. I would prefer if you waited till after class because people sometimes freak out. But you can have ecstatic experiences outside, right? You can have an ecstatic experience at a Taylor Swift concert, right? You could find this to be the most meaningful thing you've ever done, being in this place with thousands of other people, singing the same songs and seeing your favorite pop star, right? All of that can exist outside of religion. Now, that said, a lot of things start to break down, right? A lot of the things that religious communities sort of foster will start to break down to some extent for that community when accessing superhuman powers is no longer the goal, right? Or becomes a secondary pursuit. So what you see here, and we'll make this point, as we go through, and especially when we look at some of the religious landscape questions, a lot of religious communities in particular, right, religious groups, once they sort of push accessing, God or superhuman powers to a secondary status, a lot of the other byproducts that come along with religion break down. Why? Specifically because a lot of times people can find those things in other places that don't require the rituals, and all of that stuff, right? So are you going to get up on a Sunday morning and drag your butt off to church in Edmonton when it's minus 780 and the roads, are literally impassable to all but, those Ram trucks that have lift kits on them? That was my experience this morning. I had to push my wife out twice before she got to the end of the alley. It was fun. Who knows what awaits me when I get home? They might be plowing, so it should be, I'll have to dig before I park. But right, for religious communities, a lot of times those things are accessible outside of those religious communities, and those communities will tend to fall apart once you stop seeking superhuman powers, right? So for it to be properly religious, seeking superhuman powers is important because all those byproducts of religion that you find in religious communities go away once you stop looking for them, right? Okay, now, that doesn't mean that these things are not important, right? I'm sure that if you went to the average mosque, church, synagogue, temple, what have you, they would give you a list of secondary religious byproducts that they think are incredibly important. Community, cultural and religious identity, a shared sense of history, shared language, shared food, right? Religious festivals, clothing, all of these kinds of things that are super important to people that are connected to religion. But for Smith, that's not the core of what religion does, right? That's not the core of what religion is. All of these things can exist outside of religion, so they aren't the core of what religion is. The core is that definition that we spent, a class and a half looking at. Okay, so let's take a look at some secondary products, features, and powers, right? So identity, right? And you can kind of break down identity into three categories here. You've got your personal identity, right? Distinct, like, self-understanding of individual people, right? Religious identity will often shape a person's sense of self, right? Like, you're Catholic, you're Muslim, you're non-denominational Protestant, right? Just Christian, Jewish, right? Your kind of self-sense of who you are is often deeply shaped by, your relationship with superhuman powers, right? Maybe you're Wiccan, right? And that defines your sense of your relationship to whatever superhuman power there happens to be, right? So, for religious people, a statement like, I am Catholic, right? Or I am Muslim, right? These are important statements of identity, right? It speaks to their personal relationship to that larger religious kind of group or understanding or superhuman power. All right, group identity, right? An individual's understanding of their identity as derived from membership in a social group or institution, right? So as opposed to just your personal identity and your personal connection to a superhuman power, that's your connection to the group, right? So you are a member of, you know, the Roman Catholic Church, and you go to a specific parish, you are a member of, you know, you're Jewish, right? So you're a member of this larger group of, you know, Jews and global Judaism and what that means, right? So and these two are closely linked often, right? Your personal identity and your group identity. One is more like what it means for you personally, and the rest is your relationship to this larger group of people. And yeah, the collective social identity or sense of belonging that emerges from joint self-definition, common social location, and shared emotional investments, right? You know, certainly a social group, right, will have this sense of collective identity. Sometimes, and we'll talk about this when we talk about theories of religion, a sense of us against them. That's a pretty common kind of social identity that people have, right? That we are, you know, a people set apart, if you will, without pointing at any people set apart. Because a lot of times, you know, can you be a set of people set apart and there's 1.3 billion of you? Sure, I suppose that's possible, right? So this collective sense of belonging, often a sense that you could go anywhere in the world where your people are and belong in the same way, right? Like I've heard Catholics talk about, you know, traveling to countries where they don't speak the language and attending, you know, mass, you know, you go off to Italy, you go to St. Peter's Basilica and you attend mass, you know, maybe Pope Leo's there. That actually happened to a friend of mine. They just showed up for a mass in St. Peter's and the mass was being done by Pope Leo, and they're like, cool. And I'm like, oh, a little jealous, actually. That'd be really neat. Was he wearing a White Sox cap while he did it? I don't know. It's from Chicago. Anyway, right? But they felt like they could join into this group, and that even though they didn't speak the language, they were still part of that community, right? So this can be big or small, right? But it's this kind of broad social identity that comes from a collective sense of we all belong to the same thing. We all share the same definition, right? We all have the same relationship to the institution and to the superhuman power that comes from this shared identity. How are we doing for time? We're doing okay. All right, so I could probably do one more. Community. Let's do community. Or should we stop? Are you burnt out? Is it too much? Erica, you're done? That's fair. All right. Erica can be my barometer for when we've gone too long. I'll just look at you and you can be like a old Romans on that. All right, let's stop. We'll pick up on community on Thursday. We'll keep going. It gets no, the whole thing is concepts. All right. Ooh, I didn't look at questions. Hello. Okay.
Secondary thing when it's just religion's always going to affect your identity, no matter how how involved in your life it is, right?
So the only thing I would say to that is there's lots of different sources of identity, right? Like I know people who play Warhammer and they derive an enormous amount of identity from playing Warhammer, right?
Shower, they take it there,
and they'll spend months painting tiny figures, right? And you can think of like a million different ways that people create identity that isn't religious, right? That is somehow outside of religion. So I think what Smith is trying to do is really hone in on, as the key part of the definition, those things that only religion does, right? Only religion really is set up to access superhuman, right? You can look at, nationalism. Nationalism generates a ton of identity, right? Like, I could play you the old Molson Canadian, I am Canadian commercials, right? That's identity, right? That's a sort of nationalism. But clearly nationalism isn't religion at the same time. So I think what he's trying to do is like hone in on those things that are only religion, right? That only religion does. And then say, okay, these are also things that happen in religion, right? Identity definitely gets generated in religion, but it's not exclusive to religion. And so it can't be a core component, because if it was, then everything that generates identity would be religion.